It is 1962, a classroom somewhere in Ohio. 32 kids sit in wooden desks, and the teacher has just written a single question on the chalkboard. What do you think about that? Not the correct answer, not the definition, the opinion, the one formed from what they had read the night before, what their father had explained while folding the evening paper, what the radio said before school. The question expected an answer, and the answer was expected to be earned. That was 1962. Today, roughly 1 in 4 American adults cannot name a single branch of the federal government. Not one. The government they live under, vote for, and pay taxes to. That is not a trivia failure. Every generation has people who do not know things. This is something different. This is the story of when America stopped expecting them to find out, and what it cost when it did. For most of American history, the assumption was simple. You were supposed to know things before you spoke about them. That sounds obvious. In practice, it was a whole system. In the 1940s and the 1950s, civics was a mandatory subject in nearly every public school in the country. Not an elective, not a brief unit wedged between other things. A full course, taught every year, covering the Constitution, the branches of government, how a bill became law, and why any of it mattered to the person sitting in that desk. At the same time, the American newspaper was at the peak of its reach. By 1950, daily newspaper circulation had climbed to around 54 million copies in a country of 150 million people. Most households received a paper every morning. Many received 2. The encyclopedia salesman came to the door. The set sat on the living room shelf. You looked things up. Debate was taught as a skill, not a gift you were born with. A skill. You were expected to argue both sides of a question, whether you believed them or not, because the practice of reasoning mattered more than the conclusion you reached. None of this was extraordinary. It was just what was expected. The assumption underneath all of it was quiet, and it was firm. An informed citizen was the basic requirement of a functioning republic. By 1955, television had crossed into more than half of American homes. That year matters. Not because television was dangerous, not on its own, but because it was the first time information arrived pre-packaged, visual, passive. You did not read toward a conclusion, you sat and received one. For most of the 1950s and 1960s, that was fine. Walter Cronkite ended every broadcast the same way, and that is the way it is. The implication was that the viewer still had to decide what to do with it. But slowly, the habits that required effort began to disappear. Civics classes started vanishing from school curricula through the 1970s and into the 1980s. Budget cuts. Debates about what was relevant. The reasoning varied, the result was the same. A generation that grew up without being formally taught how the country they lived in actually worked. Then came cable news. 24 hours to fill. Opinion moved into the space where reporting used to be, because opinion was cheaper to produce and more reliable to watch. Then the internet. Faster. More of everything. More access to facts, and more machinery for avoiding them. Each step felt like progress. Each step made sustained, uncomfortable thinking slightly less necessary. Not a collapse, a softening. Slow enough that most people never noticed the exact moment it happened. Before going further, the word being used here needs to be precise, because stupid gets thrown around so casually that it has started to mean almost nothing. There is a difference between ignorance and stupidity. It is not a small difference. Ignorance is the absence of information. A person who has never heard of something, never been taught it, never encountered it, that person is ignorant of it. Ignorance is a starting point. It can be corrected. Most people are ignorant about most things, and that is neither shameful nor permanent. Stupidity is something else entirely. Stupidity is the refusal to engage with evidence that contradicts what you already believe. It is not a gap in knowledge. It is a wall built in front of knowledge. The information arrives. The wall holds. Voltaire understood this. He wrote that the more often a stupidity is repeated, the more it takes on the appearance of wisdom. That observation is centuries old. It describes a social media feed with uncomfortable precision. A false claim repeated 10 times feels more familiar than a true one stated once. Familiarity reads as truth. That is not a modern phenomenon, but the tools for repeating things have never in human history been this powerful, this fast, or this difficult to escape. The person who doesn't know something can learn. The person who refuses to is unreachable by different means entirely. In 1943, a German theologian named Dietrich Bonhoeffer was sitting in a prison cell in Berlin. He had been arrested for his involvement in a plot against the Nazi government. He knew what was coming. While he waited, he wrote letters to his family, to his friends, to anyone who could still receive them. In those letters, he tried to explain something he had been watching for a decade, something that troubled him more than cruelty, more than violence, something quieter. He called it stupidity. Not the same as evil, he wrote, worse in some ways. Evil is at least aware of what it is doing. The person acting from stupidity has no such awareness. They cannot be argued with. They cannot be corrected by facts. They have surrendered the habit of individual thought in exchange for belonging to a group, a movement, a leader, a cause. His key insight? Stupidity is not an intellectual failure. It is a social one. It happens to people inside systems that reward certainty and punish doubt. When belonging to something requires agreement, questioning becomes dangerous, so people stop questioning. He watched ordinary Germans become capable of extraordinary things, not because they were cruel, because they had stopped asking. The letters survived. Bonhoeffer was executed in April 1945, 3 weeks before the war in Europe ended. He was 39 years old. America is, by almost any measure, the most powerful country on earth. It is also one of the least traveled, relative to its wealth. Those two facts are not unrelated. Fewer than half of all American adults hold a valid passport. In the United Kingdom, that number is above 80%. In Canada, above 65%. Traveling requires knowing that other places exist and are worth understanding. Staying home, when home is this large, requires nothing. In the year 2000, 92% of the top 50 selling music in the United States was domestic. American music, American television, American news. The feedback loop was nearly complete, not by conspiracy, but by appetite, and by a market that learned to feed it. The result is a country where a store employee once refused to ship a package to New Mexico because she did not ship to foreign countries. Her manager agreed with her. That story circulates because it is absurd. It circulates less often as the thing it actually is, the predictable product of a system that never required that knowledge, never tested it, never treated it as the kind of thing an American needed to know. This is not stupidity of birth. It is stupidity of design. The internet was supposed to change this. It gave access to everything. It changed the appetite for almost nothing. In 1999, 2 psychologists at Cornell University published a study on a pattern they had been observing. The less a person knows about a subject, the more competent they tend to believe themselves to be. The more they actually know, the more aware they become of how much they still don't know. Knowledge breeds doubt. Ignorance breeds certainty. They called it the Dunning-Kruger effect. They were not the first to notice it. They were the first to measure it. Charles Bukowski put it more directly. The problem with the world is that the intelligent people are full of doubts, while the stupid ones are full of confidence. In a room where confidence reads as authority, on television, in politics, in a meeting, on a phone screen, the person most willing to say, "I don't know," loses every time. The person with the loudest answer, the least hesitation, the most certainty, wins the room. This is why the most informed voice is so rarely the most heard one. Expertise comes with hedging. Hedging looks like weakness. Weakness doesn't get the airtime. The consequence for a democracy is direct. Elections are shaped by the most confident voices. Public health is shaped by the most confident voices. It is possible to run an entire country on certainty and never once notice how little of it was earned. The geography confusion is easy to laugh at. The flat earth believers are easy to dismiss. But the same failure of critical thinking that produces both of those things also produces something harder to laugh at. Medical decisions get made on the basis of claims repeated loudly enough that they feel true. Not by unintelligent people, by people who were never taught to distinguish a source from a rumor, an expert from a confident stranger, a study from a story. The consequences are measurable. They show up in the records. Financial decisions follow the same pattern. The investment that sounds too good to be true finds believers in every decade, in every economic climate, in every income bracket, because it is presented with confidence in familiar language by someone who seems certain. The group believes, the group validates. The doubt feels like disloyalty. In 1980, the writer Isaac Asimov sat down and wrote an essay. He called it a cult of ignorance. There is a cult of ignorance in the United States, and there always has been. The strain of anti-intellectualism has been a constant thread, winding its way through our political and cultural life, nurtured by the false notion that my ignorance is just as good as your knowledge. He wrote that in 1980. He could have written it yesterday. The people who suffer most from the decline of critical thinking are rarely the ones who caused it. Somewhere in America, there was a teacher who would not accept a lazy answer. Not because they were cruel, because they believed the person sitting across from them was capable of a better one. There was a father who handed his kid the newspaper before dinner and asked what they thought. A grandmother who corrected you at the table, not to embarrass you, but because she had lived through enough to know that a wrong idea, left unchallenged, has consequences. There was someone who made you look it up, who treated your mind as something that required exercise, not just entertainment. That expectation used to be the default. It is not gone, but it is quieter now than it used to be. The difference between 1962 and today is not intelligence. Human beings are not less capable of thought than they were 60 years ago. The difference is expectation. The expectation that thinking was required, that forming an opinion without earning it first was the thing to be embarrassed about. Critical thinking never died in America. It just lost the people who demanded it. If there was someone in your life who would not let you get away with a lazy answer, a teacher, a parent, a grandparent, anyone who sat across from you and refused to let the conversation end there, put their name in the comments. Because those people are the reason this conversation is still worth having.